This week on Head to Head, what kind of battles will we see in Episode 9?
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So how you been doing this week, Darryl?
I've been all right, man. Just recuperating nicely. Getting better every week. I started some physical therapy, so that's been beneficial, and I'm ready to kind of, press forward on that, and then hopefully I'll go to outpatient soon, and that's where the real challenge begins, but I'm steadily preparing for it, so it's been a good week for me. How about you?
Oh, man, yeah. This week has actually been pretty good. Work has been going really well, and done a couple of successful productions this week, so, everything's been cool, but we're not here to talk about our work lives or even our physical therapy. We're here to talk about Star Wars.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's go to the Cantina. All right, so what do we got in the Cantina this week?
Well, good news, since we want to start off everything with some good news. John Williams is doing better. As you may know from one of our last podcasts, John Williams kind of fell ill a few weeks ago, and he had to kind of cut his conducting short, but now he's home. He's resting in LA. He's doing well. He's resuming his everyday activities, which bodes great for Star Wars fans because we cannot lose him before he scores episode 9.
Absolutely have to have him at least for episode 9.
At least for episode 9. I mean,
let him just finish out.
Yeah, that's his last one. We don't need another. We already lost Carrie Fisher. We can't lose John Williams. So
let him finish what he started, so to speak. Borrow a little bit of a Kylo reference. I mean, that is remarkable, though, because the guy is 85 years old or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys are up there. I mean, Harrison Ford, he's up there too.
Yeah, he is. He's 76 or something.
Yeah, and I think that, that's the scary thing is that eventually we're going to have to say goodbye to someone soon. And that's not going to be a good thing to have to talk about. But, we always have the legacy of their work that they're going to leave behind. But I'm not ready yet, so I'm glad to hear John is doing well.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that he is such a key component to Star Wars. Like I had mentioned on a couple of podcasts ago, I actually had the opportunity to see the music of A New Hope perform live while we were watching A New Hope. The Detroit Symphony Orchestra actually performed the music while the movie was going on, and it was a really cool experience. But one of the things that it really showed was just how critical the music is to the Star Wars saga.
Right. Yeah, I actually, that kind of inspired me because when you went to that show, I hopped on YouTube and I kind of started looking at other orchestras playing the music from Star Wars, whether it's the Imperial March or songs from A New Hope, the Han and Leia theme, and just the intricacy of the music and just, when he sees what he sees in his head and then he puts that to paper, and then it comes to life. It's just
it's just amazing.
It's amazing.
Because I'll tell you what actually amazed me. It wasn't even just the themes. A lot of his themes are brilliant, but what really was incredible was just some of the, the more incidental music that was going on. It's how are you getting that from this scene? Because
Right.
These guys watch the stuff on the screen or whatever, and then they're composing the music, and of course they perform it to the actual, the actual video of the movie as well.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that how are you getting this little scene out of that?
Well, the other thing too, I just also wondered, how long does it take him to really put it together and think okay, this is do you get pieces of the song, or is it the whole song pops into his head, or does he okay, well, it starts this way and then, well, maybe it goes, and then how long does it take him to put it all together?
Yeah.
And does he get it right the first time? Yep, it's perfect.
Well, I do remember there was I think one of the extra features on one of the prequel DVDs really went into his process. It's been a minute, of course, since I watched the special features on those, but yeah, it from what I remember, he basically, he'll read the script, because he'll get the script first, and that's when he starts formulating some ideas on at least overall themes. I think if I remember correctly, he was saying something about he'll read a scene, for instance, and then he'll sort of think of some theme in his head of the different characters. I think he actually comes up with the characters first, and then, of course, once he actually sees some footage, then he'll start composing some of the more incidental music. But yeah, it's just amazing. And even though there are a lot of guys that could sort of replicate what he's done. Like, I forgot the composer's name, but the guy that does the music for Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, he's awesome.
He's amazing. And he's definitely the heir apparent, in my opinion, to John Williams.
Yeah.
But, this is episode 9. It's like John Williams has to close it out.
Yeah, the last hurrah, for at least, for him. So, yeah, we definitely are wishing John the best, and I hope he continues to get better. And can't wait to hear what he has for us for episode 9.
No, and now, John Williams is recovering and returning to Star Wars, but he's not the only one returning to Star Wars.
That's true. Yeah, Diego Luna is actually returning back to the Star Wars franchise, and Diego Luna played Cassian Andor in Rogue One. And he was one of the main pivotal characters in that movie, and he's actually getting a spinoff show on the Disney new network that they have, the whole streaming platform that they have. And we don't have a name for it just yet, but it's going to feature him heavily. And I think it's going to kind of take place in the beginnings of the rebellion, and kind of how that started, kind of roughly before Rogue One and everything like that, how he became a spy and kind of his backstory, because he kind of alluded to it a little bit in Rogue One. So I think they're kind of going to take it back, and we kind of see how that kind of starts to form.
Yeah, it's amazing because this is one of those stories that, again, I've been pretty busy lately, so I haven't been keeping up with as much, but that one slipped under the radar.
Yeah.
When you told me about it, I'm like, wow, really? I mean, but it makes perfect sense because, we did see a slightly darker version of the rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
That they weren't quite as squeaky clean as they appeared to be in the...
Yeah.
That they weren't above using some tactics to achieve their goals either. And I thought that was a really fascinating aspect of Rogue One. And to dig into Diego, and I can tell you, too, that I actually read the Rogue One novel, and that went into a lot more depth as far as each of the characters that we're introduced to in Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was really fascinating. And I remember thinking as I was reading this novel, like, man, it would be really, really cool to actually get a backstory, like even more backstory on these guys.
Yeah, a lot of the characters in Rogue One are really interesting. I mean, aside from... of course, Cassian Andor, but, there's so many different characters that you can really kind of delve in. I would love to even see we kind of saw the relationship with Krennic and, what's his name already? Just slipped my mind. But even Krennic, this is how he rose up in the Empire, and, how he's kind of just started to take the whole Kyber Crystal mission on, and I think there's a lot of different characters into that. And of course, people are going to wonder, are we going to see Vader in that type of situation? Because anytime you do anything pre New Hope, everybody's wants to know if Vader's going to be in it. So I don't know. I don't think they're actually going to bring him in, but I think you might hear mentions of him, or they might see,
imagine
glimpses or something,
yeah.
of something like a hologram or something like that. But I don't think they're actually going to physically bring Vader into this.
No, but you hit a really good nail on the head, though, when you're talking about Krennic. It's Galen Erso. That's who you're thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah, Jin's father. I remember because, I read Catalyst, and if you guys don't know, Catalyst is actually a prequel novel to Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
So right before Rogue One came out, they released a novel called Catalyst, and it basically chronicles a lot of the events that led up to Rogue One. And one of the primary things was they really went into the whole relationship between Krennic and Erso, and why, when you see the events of Rogue One, even though you can totally enjoy Rogue One as it is, you enjoy it a lot more if you've actually read this novel, because it really just makes the story that much more heartbreaking, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of it. I kind of finished my drink already. How about you?
Yeah, well, you know what? There is one more little thing that we should talk about before we...
Ooh.
Yeah, before we leave the cantina...
Oh, another round.
Yeah. There was another rumor that's actually been making its rounds, and that is Matt Smith maybe slated to play a young Palpatine in Episode 9.
No, now that one slipped past me.
Yeah, now, he basically played Doctor Who, and, in the series, of course. But the interesting thing about that is that, even though a lot of people know him from the Doctor Who series, he's now slated to possibly play Matt Smith in Episode 9. Now, the whole gist of that, because a lot of people are like, well, wait a minute, why would there be a young Palpatine in an episode that takes place after Return of the Jedi when he was really old? But apparently there's supposed to be a scene that's rumored to be in there where Kylo Ren finds a Sith holocron, and Palpatine gives him a bunch of information. Like, it's basically a holocron of, Palpatine. But everybody assumed that it would actually be Palpatine when he was a little bit older. Maybe sometime after Revenge of the Sith.
Or maybe even earlier, maybe even...
that's what it is. Everybody's thinking that it might actually be earlier in Palpatine's career.
Before Episode 1.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, without question, before Episode 1. Probably around the time that he was still with Plagueis, or maybe after he killed him, or... so, I mean, it's been making its rounds, and it was just something, even though I know it was kind of a late addition to our Cantina segment, I thought I would make mention of that simply because it is an interesting topic to talk about.
Yeah,
and it is making the rounds, and I'm sure some of our listeners have heard this as well.
Well, just to speculate on that just a little bit, that's interesting because I kind of wonder, like, if Kylo was kind of wondering, like, okay, how the heck did Luke do that whole force projection thing? Because Kylo probably was like never seen that or heard of that before.
Yeah.
So he's probably wondering, like, okay, well, there's some force stuff out here that I definitely don't know.
It's like, you know what?
And I need to find
I need to find some, nobody told me that you could do this.
Exactly. And so he doesn't want him teaching that crap to Rey, and then he gets defeated. So he's probably looking like, all right, well, I got to go above even my grandfather and go to his master. Maybe I can find some stuff, so maybe that's where that comes from.
Well, it also, you have to really wonder is, I keep thinking that Darth Plagueis is actually going to make some sort of an appearance in Episode 9. I've been thinking this. Well, of course, I actually thought he was going to make his appearance in 8. In fact, I thought it was going to be revealed that Snoke was Plagueis.
Right. A lot of people, yep.
And when that didn't turn out to be true, I sort of put it to rest because, as we all know, Snoke dies in 8. But then I started thinking, you know what? With all the traction that it's gaining, maybe we're going to learn some more. Maybe Snoke isn't really dead. I mean, there's all kinds of speculation out there right now. And it's really hard to figure out what's going to happen because, as you and I have talked about several times in the past, both on this show and off the show, there's so much they have to do with 9, and it can go anywhere. I mean, you have to wrap it up. You want to tie in the entire saga as a whole and wrap up all the loose threads there. And I always thought that, when they introduced Plagueis in 3, it was, I mean, obviously George, his whole thing is different from what Disney's doing.
Right.
But I had always wondered, why did he put that little bit of information in there? Did he have plans for it later on?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly think that George probably just put it in there because it fit the story and it made sense to kind of find some way to try to convince Anakin to come to the dark side. And something like that would be a great temptation for him because, if you have a power that can keep the ones that you love from dying, and that was his greatest fear, that's the ultimate carrot to dangle in front of Anakin.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, it could just be a total manipulation. He could have made the whole thing up and just like, Plagueis. Plagueis. He found it, and I'll show it to you. And then now, because he's like, well, I don't have it, but, Well,
I think
he kind of pulled a whole Han Solo on him, like,
but
don't have it with me.
Well, there's the whole thing, too, though, where he was talking about where, there's a lot of things that have been said. A lot of people have said, well, look, Plagueis really existed, and Palpatine really did learn how to do, the whole bringing people back or whatever. Because don't forget, there's the whole theory out there that he's the one that actually created Anakin.
That's true.
So, I mean, and, hopefully maybe we find something out about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different ways you can go with it, and let's see. We got to see what JJ cooks up because, like you said, he has a lot of different loose ends to tie up, and he has a lot of
without question,
things to kind of put to rest. So it's going to be interesting, definitely.
Well, what do you guys think? We want to hear from you all. I mean, why don't you hit us up on our Twitter at headtoheadsw or our Facebook page? Leave something in the comments section. I mean, tell us what you guys think. We'd really like to know what, you think of all this because you know what we think.
Yeah, definitely. Make sure you hit us up, and we love to hear, and we can kind of go back and forth with that.
Absolutely. All right, now I think we can finally put our drinks down and leave the cantina.
Yes, before I have to go potty.
Yes. Which would be very difficult for you now, since you still haven't fully healed.
Exactly.
No back to tank for you, my friend. All right, so what do we got next?
Next, we have Duel of the Fates. So today, which Vader moment was the most shocking? The Luke, I am your father, or seeing him without his mask in Return of the Jedi?
Well, this is kind of an interesting turn of events for our Duel of the Fates segment.
Yeah, I tried to mix it up a little.
You do have to mix it up. I mean, it is good to mix it up a little bit. I'm going to go with, it's funny because you actually hit on something, and this is where that generational thing comes into play that we always talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Two fans, two different generations, all things Star Wars, our slogan, in case you guys haven't caught on yet. No, it's interesting because when we were ever since we were introduced to Vader way back in 1977,
mm-hmm.
One of the things that we had always wondered is, man, what's under the mask? What does he look like under the mask? And then they tease you a little bit in Empire Strikes Back. Right. You see him with his head turned, and you're trying to just like squint your eyes and get every little bit of detail that you can out of this. And then he turns around and you're just like, I wish they had let him turn around before he got the mask.
Yeah, he was sort of like the Dr. Claw of like Star Wars.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously when, he's all like, help me take this mask off. And, he peels it off and you finally see it. There's such it's just such this big climactic moment in Star Wars fandom that you finally get to see this. And that's so satisfying.
Yeah.
So there is that.
Right.
The other hand, though, the I am your father moment, that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're going to say most shocking, I'd have to say that's the most shocking because nobody anticipated that. And in fact, when we first heard that, of course, at first we thought, oh, it's a tactic to try to get Luke to, be curious. Because, we knew from A New Hope that it's like, look, one of the things that Luke was almost obsessed with is who is his real dad? And, he heard all these things about him and, he just wanted a bunch of information.
Yeah, and especially since he was under the impression that he died. So it's kind of like the one person he trusted who seemed to really was able to tell or was willing to tell him about his father because, his uncle was like, every time he brought it up, he kind of almost like wanted to change the subject. So now that he had Obi-Wan Kenobi basically tell him, oh, yeah, he's this great pilot and a good friend. And, yeah, he fought in the Clone Wars with him. And
yep, good old Ben Half-Truth Kenobi.
So, like, Luke is like, okay. And of course, even up until that moment, like, Luke is like, he told me enough. He told me you killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you hear, like, I am, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, it's just so unbelievably shocking. I mean, there's no other real word for it. That's why I just say that it's just so crazy because on one hand, up until that point, Darth Vader is the most evil guy in the entire galaxy and he's really powerful. And, so your first instinct naturally is this guy is pretty much just lying to Luke and trying to use whatever tactics he can to get Luke to side with him. Because remember, one of Darth Vader's biggest motivations, and this was even, before all this stuff, because right now we lived in a somewhat spoiled time where we have a lot of the backstory of Star Wars now. Mm-hmm. So, we know retroactively a lot of these different things, and there's just so much Star Wars information that we can look up.
Right.
Whereas back then, you didn't really have anything. I mean, there were interviews with the actor, and the actors didn't even know anything about their own characters, really. So you had George Lucas, and George Lucas would say, I mean, he would give you some information, but he even was kind of aloof with a lot of the things he was saying. So you really, honestly don't know too much other than Vader's this really evil guy. He's pretty much the most powerful being in the galaxy up to that point. Because even the Emperor, we knew about him, we see him, we know he's pulling Vader's strings, but we don't really know
how powerful.
Yeah, how powerful he is yet. We know he's got to be powerful enough because, I mean, if Vader's listening to him.
Right.
But then Vader was listening to Tarkin, too.
That's true.
We didn't know that Tarkin was basically another one of Palpatine's favorites. There's just a lot of things that we didn't know back then.
Well, you know what? I also think, too, like, in thinking about it all, when I was coming up with the question, it's like, how did Vader even know to use that tactic? Like, because he almost assumed that Obi-Wan didn't tell him. So it's like, how did he even know? Like, that's what I mean. I'm just wondering, like, Vader, like, is either he knew his old master that well to know that he would never tell Luke that. Because it's kind of like, how did he even know to even use that tactic to even sway Luke, even in the least bit? So I thought that was actually kind of very cunning of Vader. Like,
well, it was, but I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I know what you're saying. You're saying it's like, look, it's not like he really knows Luke. How would he know that Luke was longing to know who his dad was? Maybe he felt he was abandoned and hated his dad for all he knew.
Maybe he just didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, but what I'm thinking is the fact that there's a couple of different things. Now, of course, some of this is speculation, like a lot of things in Star Wars, but you could almost look at it from the standpoint of if he reached out in the Force and he can feel certain things, and even in that moment, even if this wasn't something that he was doing, when he was spinning around helplessly after the first Death Star blew up, you could assume that he was sensing Luke, because remember, he can sense fear, he can sense anger, he can sense a lot of these things, so he might have actually sensed a lot of this questioning and confusion or whatever. And during the battle and everything, he's, feeling him out in the Force, basically, and thinking, hey, okay, I can use this sense of longing, sense of confusion, not knowing where you fit in the universe to
my advantage, basically.
Yeah, because don't forget, and this is something that I think gets lost on a lot of people, is that Vader really hated Palpatine and he wanted to overthrow him, like most Sith do with their masters.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is the apprentice tries to find an apprentice of his own to help him, to train him in secret, and then they go up against the master. If the apprentice doesn't just take out the master himself,
right?
That's a tactic. And one of the things that we knew from, canon, even when Lucas still had it, because we have the Force Unleashed games, we have all this stuff, is that Vader was actually trying to train a bunch of people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that his whole tactic against Luke, I think that it was brilliant. And you do you brought up a good point.
I usually do.
Where after the first Death Star blew up, of course, he wanted to know who the heck this guy was because he felt how strong he was in the Force. So he's trying to figure out, okay, who the heck is this guy? So then, of course, he kind of, I guess in that time, found out like, okay, well, Luke Skywalker. Wait, Skywalker.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he's like, wait, so he started putting the pieces together. And then, of course, he and Palpatine started putting the whole puzzle together.
Yeah, right. Like, first of all, okay, now you're lying to me about Padme, and now you even, okay.
Yeah, so then now
I'm really going against this guy. Yeah, and, of course, what better guy to get on his side
than his own kid,
who is also related directly to the Force, so he knows he's going to be powerful.
Exactly. And, I was just amazed at how he was just able to figure out that that's what Luke wanted in that moment. And so I think that, but I will say that the Return of the Jedi moment, I never thought we were actually, and of course I saw these movies on VHS, so I never saw them in the theaters like you all did. So I just never thought we were going to see Vader's face at all. I thought it was going to kind of cut away again or something like that, or we're just going to see like the back of his head and he was just going to be talking and so to kind of see the man behind the mask was really kind of like, wow, he is human, and then.
Yeah, you know what's really cool about that, too? They actually did a thing where some fan had done a documentary on David Prowse, the actual actor that was in the Vader suit, right? Well, as a lot of people may know, and some of you maybe you don't know this, but what ended up happening was somehow David Prowse wasn't actually called to the set the day they were showing the whole unmasking of Vader thing.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, because Lucas and Prowse kind of had a falling out, and apparently this happened at some point, even during the filming of Return of the Jedi. Like, I think if it was up to Lucas, he wouldn't have even been in the movie. But what ended up happening is, for whatever reason, and they decided to replace David Prowse with Sebastian Shaw, and they shot the scene with him, and Prowse didn't even know about it. Because I think they actually shot like a slightly different ending or something. So he didn't even know. So what ended up happening was, as part of this almost tribute to him, in addition to doing the documentary, this filmmaker actually went and paid all this money to shoot that end of Return of the Jedi with Prowse.
Oh, wow.
In the suit. They recreated the whole Death Star thing. I mean, obviously they didn't get Mark Hamill on there, but they got somebody else that kind of looked like him, and they shot it more from, his perspective to actually get David Prowse saying those lines.
Oh, wow.
Which was kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, you can, even though I would say in this particular matchup, the I Am Your Father is more shocking, you really cannot discount the
unmasking of it.
Yeah, and the just the monumental moment that really is.
And once again, going back to John Williams, just if you notice the music that was playing, like when it happened, that it was very soft, very peaceful.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about his music.
Like
that's the thing. And it, again, I mean, I hate to keep rubbing the salt in the wound about that whole New Hope DSO thing that you unfortunately had to miss due to your injuries. But, it's almost like, help me take this cast off. But, I mean, basically what it comes down to is the fact that you realize that a lot of times you don't notice a lot of this music because it is such a perfect marriage of the music and then the scene.
In the moment, yeah.
And it all blends together in one powerful imagery.
Yeah.
That it's mind-blowing. And, yeah, I mean, the music that was played during that moment was just so perfect for that scene. Again.
That's off to John Williams.
So, I mean, I think we're pretty much in agreement then that the I Am Your Father one wins. I think we're together on this.
Yeah, and especially with it being the most iconic line in Star Wars history.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it has to.
Yeah, people are probably, if you read the show notes before you watched the show, you're probably like, okay.
Really?
Kind of know which one these guys are going to go with. But what do you guys think? Once again, at Head to Head SW, just hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you think. And maybe you feel differently than we do. Maybe you think the unmasking of Vader was the most important moment. We would love to hear from you guys.
Definitely.
All right. Well, it's time for our next topic, which we call From a Certain Point of View. Now, this is actually our feature topic. Again, we always say this on every podcast, but a lot of these topics end up being more or less. But this is the one that actually holds the title of our podcast. So what do we got today? Or this week? We always say that.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's whatever.
They know.
Yeah, they know. It's our podcast. We can say what we want.
What kind of battles will we see in episode 9?
Ooh, what kind of battles will we see in episode? Well, this is really interesting because we didn't really, I mean, even though The Last Jedi had a lot of space moments, it didn't, I mean, it was kind of a standoff type of a situation, but I really wouldn't call it a battle in the traditional sense. So that was the one thing that I think a lot of people really were, I wouldn't say they were down on, but I think a lot of people really wanted some sort of a episode 3 like epic space battle. And it really is interesting because if you look at all the Star Wars films, you get all these different kind of battles. Like, for instance, for me, I really thought that whole like beach battle in Rogue One was really cool.
Yeah,
and
that was awesome.
It was different, and honestly, I wish it had gone on longer. I wish they had had more scenes in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be open to something that was more of a... Because to me, that scene in Rogue One reminded me of an expanded version of the Hoth battle.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to see more of that outdoor ground type battle. I think that would be...
Yeah, like the indoor one, like... like you said, Rogue One.
You know, I'm one of those guys, honestly, that I mean, I like the space battles, but I'm not as up on them as a lot of people are.
Yeah, the space battles, I mean, they're cool. They're not as... It's kind of like if it was done more like in a Top Gun-ish kind of way, it'd probably be more cooler just because you can focus on the stuff. But it's like, it's so much going on out there.
Well, I think that's the reason why everybody holds the battle in A New Hope. Because, I mean, honestly, I would agree. There's a lot of people that feel the Return of the Jedi battle, or, of course, the Revenge of the Sith battle, the whole opening. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was.
But I think the reason why people hold A New Hope is because it is more Top Gun-ish. You're following the characters. It's not overwhelming, but it is exciting. But I think part of the problem is that, you know, it was new back then, and we've seen so many space battles now that it's almost passé. You know, it's just...
Yeah. But I will say the special edition version, like when he went back and redid the shots,
well,
that made it even better for New Hope, man. That was just...
Yeah, that was just off the charts cool. And I mean, the fact that they blended it so well.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, with the Rogue One space battle, what I thought was interesting is how they actually used some footage of those guys and, you know, put it in that movie. So I mean, they did all kinds of really cool stuff in Rogue One for that. But... yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to see some space battles in Episode 9.
Well, I think I would love... You know what? We've never had an underwater battle.
Yeah, unless you count the Phantom Menace... they were
running away from these little sea monsters. No, it's like...
There's always a bigger fish.
Right, it's like Meg, the Star Wars edition.
Right.
But, no, I mean, I think that would be cool just because that's something we've never seen before, or at least a battle out on the water. Well, not in the movies,
no.
Yeah, that's something like a battle out on the water because, I mean, in the comics, you see the Mon Calamari, like that's...
Yeah, the whole latest, the Darth Vader comic, that's been having some pretty cool underwater battles.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, well, that would be kind of sweet, you know, just because, you know, you want to see how certain people adapt in certain, you know, environments and things like that.
Or if it was something like a Camino type of planet.
Right.
That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, so I think that would be awesome. And
sort of the Star Wars Aquaman type of thing.
Right. It's like Star Wars meets Atlantis. But then I think also I would love to see... And it has to. We actually have to have a really good lightsaber duel. Like, it has to be a really good one because I think that's what fans, including myself, are kind of clamoring for.
Well, and they, you know, in the sequel trilogy, they really haven't. I mean, I guess they had a few that were in A Force Awakens that were cool. But I mean, it hasn't been really epic, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, you got one guy who's been shot and he's trying to keep himself from hemorrhaging and bleeding all over the snow. And then you got a novice who just learned how to fly a lightsaber to her hand. She doesn't know what she's doing. Finn didn't know what he was doing, definitely.
Yeah, and you know, I've heard rumors that Finn's actually, I mean, I think that John Boyega said something about how Finn was going to be picking up a lightsaber again. You know, so that should be interesting. It was a tweet that he answered.
Well, you know what? It might be cool if he became Rey's training partner or something. That would be cool.
Yeah. I mean, it would be
granted, she would probably have the advantage.
Well, it depends. Like, I don't necessarily need to see, although a former stormtrooper training to be a Jedi would be kind of an interesting twist.
That would.
But at the same time, you know, because, I mean, one of the, it's sort of funny because, you know, I'm on my church bowling league, and a lot of those guys actually listen to our podcast.
Okay.
You know, and one of them actually asked me if there was ever a Wookiee Jedi, and I knew there was, but the thing is that I think that was in Legends. Like, I don't think there has been a new canon. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Well, there was one that, I could at least say, I don't know if they actually made it to the rank of Jedi, but I can definitely say they made a Padawan because We saw them, Ahsoka Tano and Yoda when they had to go find their crystals.
Oh,
in that one episode of Clone.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's what we were.
So
that's
right.
that's new
Wookiee
canon.
Jedi. There you go.
So there you go.
All right, that's freebie. We aren't even in our question and answer period yet. But hey,
yeah, but I think.
But see, that's the kind of thing that I'm saying. Like a Wookiee Jedi is kind of interesting, right? So
yeah.
a Stormtrooper who actually becomes a Jedi would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I would like I said. I think as far as the battles, I think the ones we need to see. One is a nice space battle. I think if they opened it up with a space battle, that would be cool.
Sort of like Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, but I think if towards the end you give us a good ground battle, and then of course peppered in there somewhere maybe a couple lightsaber duels, because I would love to see the Knights of Ren. I would love to see Rey and her new faction of upcoming Jedi, and of course we got to see some sort of showdown between Rey and Kylo, and I think. You got to do that.
This is the danger, though, and this is where I feel really bad for JJ in a lot of cases, because even the fans, right? And look at how the fans just crucified Rian Johnson, right? And the thing is that, but yet we'll come up with this shopping list. Here's all the things that we need to see, But you don't want to write a story where JJ's sitting there going, okay, hang on, do I have this? Yep, check. All right, do I have that? Check. It's almost like the way the fans are framing their desire for episode 9, it's almost like you have to sit there and have this whole list of everything that everybody wants in the movie and then try to write a story around that. And so that's the only thing that really they have to be very careful about, because there's a fine line between giving the fans what they'd like to see, what we'd all like to see, and really crafting a good story. Because that was one of the points that you and I made about The Last Jedi. People could say what they want, but it was a good story.
Yeah.
Now, they might not have been executed the way you would have liked, or it might not even been the story you wanted.
Right. I think, I agree. But I think there are certain beats that you have to hit in Star Wars that fans are just definitely, it's expected. It's almost like, it's like when you go see a Marvel movie, you expect at the end of the movie, some big climatic battle. I mean, it has to happen. It's kind of like no one wants to, and then they fell in love the end.
But
but
that's
it's
the
like,
difference, though. I don't think it does have to happen. Because in a Marvel movie it does, because it's based on source material, but in Star Wars you can really do anything.
True, but I think that...
But I know what you're talking about. You're talking
the source material is the original stuff. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the original trilogy is kind of exactly, and that's kind of
It is.
The premise that we've all grown. That's why we go see it, because we have these fond memories. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm being hypocritical, but I'm not. It's more so like you just have to hit certain notes, and then within that, tell your story within that. I think what you're saying is that it has to feel like Star Wars. Yeah,
and that's the biggest problem, because one of the things that everybody criticizes, well, actually, one of the big things that people criticize about The Last Jedi was it didn't feel like a Star Wars movie to some people.
Yeah, I mean,
I can see that.
Yeah, I can see that.
As much as I really enjoyed the movie, I could definitely understand that criticism.
Yeah, because I mean, I felt, although it was an interesting twist with the whole. They're trying to outrun this ship. I felt like that went on too long, in my opinion.
Yeah, it became more... Like, it actually felt more like Battlestar Galactica than Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly.
But here's a good question, though. At what point do we say, let's expand the Star Wars tradition? So in other words, do we really keep holding these Star Wars films to this very narrow traditional thing that, the original trilogy gave us? Or when can we actually expand it? Well,
my thoughts on that would be, it has to be a gradual thing. And I think what happened with Last Jedi for people, it was too much change too soon. I think Force Awakens kind of brought people back, and even though some people were critical about this, it's just like A New Hope. But if you start to gradually change, and then over time, it becomes its own thing after that, I think people can swallow that a little bit better versus like, okay, we have one that's kind of reminiscent of A New Hope, and then you shock everybody. You just throw people like in freezing cold water with Last Jedi, and everybody's like freaking out because it's like, wait, what is this? And then now you're trying to warm everybody up again with episode 9.
There's the extremes.
You know what I'm saying? Those are the extremes of it.
Right, but here's the question, though. I mean, Star Wars fans, we've all become so hypocritical. You hit the nail on the head. It's like, okay, you do something that really hits all the beats and is too familiar. You know, it's almost a Goldilocks syndrome in that sense. You know, is it too, okay, this one's too close, and then Last Jedi is too far, and we need, hopefully, episode 9 is just right. But,
well, I'll put it to you this way. Like, let's take the prequels. If you look at the prequels, we can agree that they were great stories.
Yeah.
Just poorly executed.
Yep.
So, honestly, that series or that saga, if you will, if you just actually put it in real space, not so much CG, but actually use practical effects and real and lived in places, and just better directing, I mean, it probably will stand up right up there with the original trilogy.
Yeah,
and because it hit the beats that we love, and it gave us stuff, but I think it just didn't have the look and some of the dialogue, of course, because George is not the best when it comes.
Well, but and then it comes down to it again. A lot of the reasons why it hit the beats is because it's the same guy doing them.
Yeah, but I think
once you open that door, I mean, one of the things that I really enjoyed about reading all the novels that are now considered legend. Yeah, you got some of them that maybe got a little bit silly with things, but for the most part, though, they really did expand the universe, no pun intended, because it gave us. It still felt like Star Wars, I think, but it felt different enough that it. And that's the thing. It's one of those things where it's a really fine line. But I think that I 100% agree when you're saying that it should be a more gradual thing, and that it probably did happen too early because with The Force Awakens, you just reintroduced Star Wars. You just
Since
gave it back to us.
2005, yeah.
Yeah, maybe start doing some different stuff, 10 movies in or something.
Mm-hmm.
But for a while, get everybody kind of, start the engine back up and give us the familiarity we want, but give it to us in a way that doesn't exactly copy everything.
Yeah, it just slowly starts to gradually, like, okay, I see what they did there. They're changing
that's
some
where
things.
I think a thing like The Mandalorian and stuff like that is going to be. See, they could really do a lot with the television stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, that's going to be the subject of a future podcast that we're going to do, where we're really going to delve into the television universe now and really talk about what that could mean for the future of Star Wars. Because just as a little bit of a preview, I think that television is where the future of Star Wars really will lie. Because look at how much we love Cobra Kai.
Yep.
If you look at Cobra Kai, it was a 10-episode sequel, basically, to the Karate Kid series. And it's really like a 10-hour movie, more than a TV show. And that's what I think that The Mandalorian, same thing. It's going to be a 10-episode series, but it has the budget, and it's going to have the feel of a 10-hour movie. And, I mean, I think that if they had done Solo like that, instead of releasing it as a film, because a lot of the problems that people had with it was it just felt like you were rushing too much through everything. I would have liked to have seen Han more on Corellia and then more stuff with him when he was in the Empire. Instead of just blowing through everything really fast.
He's got to hurry and meet, Chewie and Lando.
Yeah, exactly. You had to just cram all this stuff into this movie, and they had a lot of really interesting things that they just weren't able to expand upon. But imagine if Solo had been a 10-episode series.
Yeah.
Still with Alden Ehrenreich and, Donald Glover and all that. Imagine how much cooler that would have been.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's just something that's, and of course, we're going to delve into that a lot more. But I mean, getting back to this, it's one of those things where even with the battles, this is what we're going to have to do because now, remember, we just said this is what we want to see, but what kind of battles do you think you really are going to see? Well,
I think JJ is definitely going to do. I think he's going to do the big three. I think he's going to
lightsaber, the space, and the ground.
Yep, I think he's going to hit all three of those at some point throughout the movie, especially if it's a two-parter. But if it's just a solid straight movie,
yeah, I think all the two-parter stuff, I think that's gone away. I don't think we're going to see that now. What I do think we might actually end up seeing the longest of all the Star Wars films.
Star Wars 4 hours. And I will be there for all 4.
That's what I heard about the Avengers 4, that their original cut's like almost 4 hours.
I will sit through it.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, if we can all sit 3.5 hours through Titanic, I could definitely sit through a 4-hour Star Wars film.
Exactly.
You know? So, I mean, that's cool. Well, hopefully, you know, we just see some really good battles that fit into a well-crafted story.
Yeah, I think we're going to definitely see, I think they're going to go back to Kashyyyk, and I think that's going to be where we're going to get that ground battle.
Oh, that could be. Well, I know that, yeah, they did. There's been long rumors of a jungle-like planet. I think that's more or less confirmed. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so.
Mm-hmm.
And you could be right. That could be. A lot of people are thinking it's Endor, but it could be Kashyyyk. And that would actually make sense because, you know, Chewbacca is the one that's left.
Yep.
His life debt obviously is done, so he could return home.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't think it was an accident that in Solo they touched a little bit about, you know, Chewbacca and his family. And,
yeah.
And it sort of foreshadows that maybe he's going to go back to them.
And they need all the help they can get. And so,
yeah, well,
like I said, they
may or may not, though, because, well,
they need all the help they can get. I mean, there's no one left.
Well, the thing, it depends on, I'm trying to think of the timeline here, but so episode 9 happens obviously before, no, it doesn't actually. So, oh man. Yeah. So the Aftermath trilogy takes place pretty much after Return of the Jedi.
All right.
And Life Debt is heavily about Chewbacca going back to Kashyyyk and helping to free the Wookiee slaves from the Empire that still sort of has a base there. So it depends on if they want to really revisit that or not. I mean, Kashyyyk should long be free, but we don't know what the First Order did. So
exactly.
You know, it's going to be a really interesting... Episode 9 is going to be really interesting.
To say the least.
All right, well... Now it's that time where we get to you guys' questions, and it's a little topic or segment that we like to call Clear Your Mind. All right, so what do we got on deck? Oh, look. It's a question from Mark Moore. What does Mark say?
Well, Mark wants to know...
Clear your throat. And
Sorry.
Your mind.
Well, we were talking about Wookiees, so I think I might have had a fur ball.
Yeah, right. You get a little fur ball.
But Mark wants to know, is J.J. Abrams really the best director for Episode 9? What about Ron Howard's and he has more time? I think what he's trying to say is that he will have more time than he did with Solo.
Either that or maybe he's not in the middle of a movie. That is kind of a weird thing, but... We could just leave it at, is J.J. Abrams the best director for Episode 9? What about Ron Howard? Then we don't have to worry about the time.
True. Well,
No. And here's the thing. I'm a huge fan of all of Ron Howard's movies. And I really love Solo. And I love what he did. You know, he rescued that movie.
Yeah.
And... You know, I thought that his direction was pretty spot on, actually. And I think one of the things that it showed is that Ron Howard can really direct a Star Wars film. It'd be great to see him get one, you know, that he could just do.
Well, there are talks about that.
Well, I hope that happens. I really do. But here's the thing. The question is would he be better than JJ for Episode 9? And I would say categorically not, because... A lot of the stuff that's happening in 9 is things that were introduced in 7. I mean, a lot of these guys are JJ's characters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's bookended. He started it. He should finish it. I actually thought that he should have done 7, 8, 9. I was sort of hoping that he was going to be the guy that would just direct this whole trilogy. But then they said, no, he'll direct the first one, but then he's going to more or less executive produce the other ones. But then... I started thinking, well, okay, you have Rian Johnson, then you have Colin Trevorrow, and it's like, it would just be better if JJ had more input into a lot of these things, and then we find out he's directing it, so I'm totally happy with this choice.
So you wouldn't want to see Ron Howard in the director's chair and JJ executive produce it, so he can kind of guide, but see, then he can kind of guide where he wants it to go, but Ron Howard being even more of a actor's director, could really bring out the dialogue and a lot of the nuances.
Well, maybe only because I know Ron Howard being an actor, you could say that, but a lot of people just love JJ. In fact, part of the reason why Harrison Ford came back to 7 was because he worked with JJ regarding Henry, and he just thought that he was an amazing director and loves working with him. I mean, every actor loves working with J.J. Abrams because he's so sensitive. And in fact, when Daisy Ridley was really new, this is her first feature film.
Yeah.
And he was very instrumental in pulling out the best performance. Because at first she was a little bit nervous because he was so critical of what she was doing. But then she learned to just more or less let go and trust him. And, that's when we got that performance. So really, I don't know if you might make the argument that maybe Ron Howard's better. And he was, in some respects, more of a protege of George Lucas, too. I mean, to me, that would be a wash. As far as directorial talents, they're different, but I would say they're equally talented in their roles. It's just that I think JJ would be better only because of the fact that he was there. If Ron Howard had been the guy that done 7, I would have then gone with him.
Okay.
It's just, but it is tough.
Yeah, it is a tough one. I probably would have to go with JJ as well for a lot of the reasons that you already stated, especially because this is kind of his baby in a way, because he's the one who kind of took it on and to begin with. And so and with him being such a huge Star Wars fan, I think that is a bonus. I mean, I'm not saying that Ron Howard isn't, but I'm saying, I think JJ, he's expressed his love for Star Wars for so long. And I think that this will be a great way for him to close it out, to do the fans justice as far as what they want to see. I love the different shots that he got in Force Awakens. The TIE fighter coming out from the sun, that shot, just the cinematography, the look of everything. I think he nailed it right on the head. So,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that he established that, I just think that a lot of people really enjoyed, and myself included, obviously. He gave Star Wars it had a classic feel, but yet he put a much broader spin on it. Like some of the shots that you were talking about. I mean, these are really beautiful shots that, just basically brought Star Wars into a new perspective.
Yeah.
But still feeling like Star Wars, though. And I mean, I think that that's one of the things that, sometimes I know there are critics of it where people said, well, yeah, it felt too derivative. I mean, okay, if he's doing 9, is this going to be a carbon copy of Return of the Jedi? I mean, and, it's a fair question, but I still think that it's an unfair criticism that he got for 7. It has some of the same beats, but
yeah, I mean,
it's storytelling technique. It's not. He did that on purpose. It wasn't like just.
And you're trying to bring people, because everybody still had the whole bad taste in their mouth from the prequel. So he's trying to bring you back to that feel, and that was the whole point. It was
an establishing film. It's like you're coming back to that world, and give you the familiarity that people wanted. It's telling a new story. The other thing that really bothers me is when people keep saying things like, "Well, oh, it's another weapon, another super weapon, another this." And, the thing that bothers me about that is, guys, think of us on planet Earth, right? If you look through history, it's the same story over and over. Dictator rises to power, comes up with some new weapon or some new,
means of terror.
Yeah, anything. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, if you're going to have an empire or a group of people that are trying to establish dominance in a universe, obviously you have to do that with some sort of a weapon that's going to give them an edge.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than, anything else in the Marvel universe. You got another
Or
bigger,
James Bond.
bigger, badder,
If you think about
villain.
James Bond tells the same story over and over, just different ways. There's some megalomaniacal villain that's trying to dominate the entire world, and James Bond has to solve it.
Yeah.
Nobody criticizes that.
That's true.
But because, they came up with a new, bigger super weapon, it's like, well, what else are they going to do?
Exactly. Like,
what do you think an empire is going to do, or a first order, or whatever you want to call it? They're going to do something that's going to make them more fearsome than what came before them.
Exactly.
Now, if you want to criticize how the thing works, okay, I get that. I mean, there are some flaws in that, but, other than that, it's like, well, what do you want them to do? And I mean, I understand that people are saying, well, there are other stories they could tell. And now, if you're talking about that, that would be true. But once again, I mean, if your story is going to focus on, okay, the Empire's gone, but this new army essentially has risen to power, and you're basically dealing with it now on a macro level, this good versus evil, the resistance versus the First Order. If it's on a macro level like that, and you're not just dealing with some story that's taking place on a particular planet with a particular limited set of characters, then you're going to go that way.
All right.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this show.
Yes,
remember, everybody, I want you all to write to us at Head to Head SW. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. You can even email us, Star Wars at headtoheadswpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely submit your questions and your thoughts. We love to hear. We love to have this good feedback every time. And you can tell your friends that your questions were featured even on the show.
That's right. All right. Well, that about does it for this show. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.